Chapter 12 of Great Men and Famous Women, Volume 4, edited by Charles F. Horne. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Count de Mirabeau, 1749 to 1791, by Charles S. Hathaway. Honoré Gabriel Riqueté, Count de Mirabeau, one of the most eminent among the great authors, orators, and statesmen of France, was born on March 9, 1749, on his father's estate at Bignon, near Namur. The earliest of Mirabeau's ancestors, of whom there is any notable record, was Jean Riqueté, a prominent merchant at Marseille, who in 1570 bought the chateau and estate of Mirabeau near Pertuis from the well-known provincial family of Barras, and who a few years later acquired the title of Esquire. In 1685, 115 years after the purchase above mentioned, Honoré Riqueté, lineal descendant of the Marseille merchant, obtained the title of Marquis de Mirabeau, and there was born to this marquis a son, Jean-Antoine Riqueté, who achieved a worthy record as a soldier, but whose prominent place in history is due to the fact that he was the grandfather of the great Mirabeau. Victor Riqueté, son of the second Marquis de Mirabeau, and father of the Count de Mirabeau, was in his early manhood an indifferent soldier, but he afterward became distinguished as a writer and leader in French politics. His wife, the mother of Count de Mirabeau, was Marie Genevieve, the daughter of Monsieur de Visson, a brigadier in the French army, she being also the widow of the Marquis de Solebeuf. This union, entered into without a previous meeting between the principals to the contract, and at a time when the Marquis de Mirabeau was well started in his career as a politician, was not a happy one. The new husband was more loyal to politics than to his wife, so that when their son, who was destined to achieve fame, was but 13 years old, there was a separation between the parents by mutual consent. Thus in outline is indicated the ancestry of Mirabeau, through a period of nearly 2 centuries, and meager as the showing is, it is evident that he was the scion of a long line of wealth and nobility, his paternal ancestors having served with credit as soldiers, while his father was eminent as a politician. There is a second group of facts which bear interestingly upon the career under discussion. Mirabeau, the Great, was born at a time when more than 2/3 of France was in the hands of privileged classes, the king, the nobility, and the clergy, and at a time, too, when the structure, founded upon years of feudalism and absolutism, was about to be shaken to its base by the magic of popular public opinion. Under such conditions, at such a time, and from such stock, occurred the birth of Mirabeau the Great, a coming into the world of a babe scarce half made up, a child with a head so large that it was a dire deformity, with one foot sadly twisted, and with a tongue that was tied. In brief, an infant ogre born with teeth. So great was the chagrin of the father that he made no effort to conceal his dislike for the misshapen child. Hence, when at 3 years of age, the little one was left wretchedly pitted by a severe attack of smallpox, its fate was listed. It must not, could not, bear the name of Mirabeau. Accordingly, when the youngster was 14 years old, after several years of instruction under the private tutorship of La Charbonnière, Pierre, he was entered under the fictitious name of Pierre Bouffier at a private military school in Paris. Here, strong of limb, body, and mind, industrious and aggressive, he remained for 4 years. Then his father placed him in the Berry Regiment of cavalry, which regiment had been commanded 62 years before by his grandfather. This event marked the end of a boyhood which had been clouded by an almost entire absence of paternal favor, and wholly free from maternal care, the mother's absence having been secured by the father by a lettre de cachet. In addition, that boyhood had been irritated and embittered by a continuous and exasperating development of his natural personal disfigurement. His enormous head grew less in harmony with his torso. His lips and nose became thick and heavy, Great moles revealed themselves upon his cheeks, and in every way, physically, his growth was a perpetual disappointment. However, he was now in 1767 the 18-year-old Pierre Bouffier, a lieutenant of cavalry, conscious of his exceptional mental strength, and somewhat vain thereof, and full of ambition and determination to win as he wished, and in spite of all his many obstacles. Unfortunately, but most naturally, considering his temperament, the first test of his will, his passion, and his determination resulted in his victory. He won the affection of a young woman to whom his colonel had long been devoted, and the scandal resulting therefrom caused the father to obtain a lettre de cachet, by authority of which the indiscreet young man was placed in confinement in the Isle of Ré. Immediately the prisoner began his first illustration of his ability to gain to his own purposes the ability and influence of others, one of his strongest and most useful characteristics. Within 2 months he had secured the esteem and confidence of his jailer, so that the official soon made a most favorable report, upon the strength of which Mirabeau was accepted as a volunteer to accompany the French expedition sent in 1769 to conquer Corsica. So well did the young soldier conduct himself during this campaign that he was not only promoted to a captaincy in the dragoons, but he effected a partial reconciliation with his father, returned to Provence, was permitted to assume his true name and title, and was presented at court. In June 1772 he married, by his father's advice, Marie Emile de Cauvet, only daughter of the Marquis de Marignane. She came to him portionless, and he, impetuous, ambitious, and extravagant, became during the next 2 years deeply involved in debt. His marriage was a failure. Again the father utilized the lettre de cachet, and a second time was Mirabeau a prisoner, August 23, 1774, this time in the Château d'If at Marseille. Here it was that he wrote his first work of which we have any exact knowledge, its title being Essai sur le despotisme. In the following year he was transferred from the Château d'If to the castle of Joux, where he was less strictly confined. He had the freedom of the place and frequent opportunities for visiting the nearby town of Pontellier. It was in this town that he first met Marie Theresa, the Marchioness de Monnier, the young and attractive wife of an aged magistrate. A love affair was the result, and it culminated in August 1776 in an elopement, first to Switzerland and then to Amsterdam. For over 9 months the fugitive pair lived together in the Dutch capital. Mirabeau, under the assumed name of Saint Matthew, earned a livelihood as a pamphleteer, and by making translations for Holland publishers. Meanwhile the tribunal of Pontarlier had condemned both parties, Mirabeau to be beheaded, and his companion, his Sophie, as she is most widely known, to imprisonment for life. On May 14, 1777, they were arrested in Amsterdam, and Mirabeau was imprisoned by a lettre de cachet in the castle of Vincennes, while Sophie was surrendered to the Pontarlier authorities. For 3½ years thereafter Mirabeau was in confinement, a term which proved sufficient to temper his passion, and during which he wrote his well-known letters to Sophie, the Erotica Biblion, and My Conversion. He also wrote during this time his first worthy political production, the Letters de Cachet. He was released from this imprisonment on December 13, 1780, and at once sought out Sophie, to quarrel with and leave her, and so, fortunately, end the most disgraceful portion of his life. Mirabeau, now 31 years old, and according to the times most liberally experienced in the ways of the then turbulent world, undertook as his first task the removal of the sentence of death which still confronted him. Not only did he succeed in this, but by his plausibility and eloquence he shifted the entire cost of the proceedings to the shoulders of the complainant, the aged magistrate he had so grossly wronged. His next venture was an effort before the tribunal of Aix to compel his wife to return to him. Here he failed. He also failed in an effort to compromise a suit pending between his father and mother. Not only that, but by his pleadings, his mother became forever alienated from him, and by reason of his bitter attacks upon the rulings of the court, he was forced to leave Paris. Locating in Amsterdam, he began his lasting and respectable relations with Madame de Nara, daughter of Zweer van Haren, a Dutch writer and politician. She was a woman of education and refinement, who exercised a valuable influence over his rapidly growing celebrity, bringing out his good qualities, subduing his undesirable characteristics, and encouraging all of his better ambitions. It was at her suggestion that he went to England, after a brief stay in Holland, while she repaired to Paris. His mission, which he accomplished, was to publish his considerations sur l'ordre du Cincinnatus, and his daughter sur la liberté de la Scotte, while her mission, also successful, was to establish peace between Mirabeau and the authorities at the French capital. During 20 years of the 36 years he had lived, Mirabeau had been, either through his father's intervention or by his own acts, a constant topic of consideration by the French authorities. On the other hand, by virtue of his writings, he declared enmity to all forms of tyranny and oppression, and his distaste for pretense, he had become a popular idol. He was, as Carlyle put it, a swallower of formulas, and it seems he had the ability to digest such food thus taken. Therefore, upon his return to Paris in April 1785, he made a series of attacks upon agiotage, or stock jobbing, most effectively assaulting the Compagnie du Haut and the Banque du St. Charles. While such efforts proved offensive to the government, it caused such an appreciation of his ability that he was sent in June of 1786 on a secret mission to Berlin. He remained there for a year and a half, and during that time he secured the material for his notable work, Histoire secrète de la Cour de Berlin. Among other writings which he produced about this time were his Moses Mendelssohn, ou la réforme politique du Juif, and his pamphlet Dénonciation de l'agiotage, aimed against the policy of Cologne. Again he was in danger of the lettre de cachet, and so he repaired to Brunswick, where he finished his work De la Monarchie Prussienne, which was published in 1788. Up to 1789, Mirabeau had been a dramatic character, an individual revelation of theatric passion, a figure piece, single and alone. But the climax was at hand. The achievement of American independence had been an object lesson most potent. Louis and his queen, Marie Antoinette, could not check the storm, and for the first time in 173 years, France was to have an assembly of the nation by its representatives. The Third Estate was aroused, and the States General was summoned. Mirabeau, having a deep-rooted desire to provide for France a government in accord with the wishes and intent of a majority of the people, and having been rejected by the noblesse of his own district, presented himself to the Third Estate as a candidate. He was elected, both for Aix and for Marseille, and he decided to sit for Aix. Naturally an enthusiast, he was present May 4, 1789, at the opening of the States General, but with excellent sagacity he entered that body as an independent. To the end of his life, 23 months later, he maintained that independence. When being shut out in the rain from the great hall of the estates, the Third Estate established themselves in the adjacent tennis court, and when being ejected from there, they came together again and forced the king to recognize them as the representatives of the nation. Through all these earlier and wiser stages of the great revolt, Mirabeau was the leader and director, but when on June 5, 1789, a resolution was passed by the delegates declaring themselves the people, the Commons of France, to be the National Assembly, he spoke and worked bravely and eloquently against abandoning the old order of things, before formulating an exact and sufficient policy as its successor. He declared the action a hasty one, and finally avoided the issue in the only way possible, by absenting himself when the vote was taken. And yet, 8 days later, at the close of the royal sitting, he bade the Grand Master of Ceremonies, "Go and tell your master, we are here by the power of the people, and that we are only to be driven out by that of the bayonet. He advised the Assembly against the publication of pompous proclamations, and classed the demonstration of the night of August 4th as a theoretical display of liberty, wholly without practical value. He was opposed to mob law, and in no sense was he dazzled by the fall of the Bastille. He pleaded in favor of the royal right to veto, and proclaimed that he was willing even to advocate a restoration of the king's legitimate authority as the only means of saving France. He was a leader of magnificent power, enthusiastic in the advocacy and support of his convictions, a statesman who would not speak, write, or do in politics anything not in accord with his estimate as to what was right. True, he was accused of treason for speaking in support of the king's right to proclaim war or peace, but 3 days thereafter he defended himself against the charge, and with overwhelming success. He was a leader who worked prodigiously. In addition to his duties as a member of the Assembly, he was also publisher and editor of a paper first called the Journal des États Généraux, later the Lettre à mes Constituants, and at last the Courrier de Provence. As clerk of the Committee Diplomatique of the Assembly, and because of his thorough knowledge of foreign affairs, he was the constant adviser of Montmorin, the Foreign Secretary. Thus, by his wise appreciation of the subject, he established harmony between the Assembly and Montmorin, and so prevented foreign intervention, at the same time maintaining the honor of France abroad. But this bulwark to the nation's safety was about to topple and fall, precipitated by its own decay. As in all things, Mirabeau had been colossal in his excesses, and like them, the punishment was great. He wished to live, but he did not fear death. Early in 1791, the structure began to weaken, and realizing that the time was at hand, Mirabeau carefully collected all of his writings, and after classifying them, forwarded them to his firm friend and companion, Sir Gilbert Elliot, in England. So far as he was able, he continued to contribute to the guidance and protection of his country. He was patient and fearless, his only regret taking the form of a pardonable conceit that, could he but live, the revolution could be controlled and guided, that the awful reign of terror so soon to follow could be averted. The progress of his decline was without hindrance, in spite of all that science could devise. It is reported that as he looked out from his sick room on the day of his death, on the brilliant springtime sun, he said, "If he is not God, he is at least his cousin german." Thus were, it is said, his last spoken words, although some time later, when unable to articulate, he feebly held a pen in his hand as he wrote the single word "dormir." And so on April 2nd, 1791, he died. Thus ended the life of a wondrous statesman, a singular career, of which Carlyle, in his French Revolution, says, "Strange lot! 40 years of that smoldering with foul fire damp and vapor enough, then victory over that, and like a burning mountain he blazes heavens high, and for 23 resplendent months pours out in flame and molten fire torrents all that is in him, the pharaohs and the wonder signs of an amazed Europe, and then lies hollow, cold, forever." End of chapter 12.